Tem um momento na carreira que precisamos dar um passo além. É hora de fazer uma pós-graduação. Só que muitas vezes o custo pesa no bolso, inviabilizando tudo. Com a pós-graduação do Senac, você não tem esse problema. Cursos com até 50% de desconto e muito mais tempo para pagar. TCC opcional, modelo flexível com aulas presenciais e online e alguns cursos com apenas 12 meses de duração. Não tem mais desculpa, hein? Saiba mais em sp.senac.br/pós-graduação.
Esse podcast é um oferecimento de Samsung Galaxy AI. E sabe o que mais ele te oferece? Que tal um intérprete em tempo real na palma das suas mãos para você nunca mais ter problemas em viagens ou reuniões? E falando em viagens, não precisa mais ficar com aquela foto torta. Com a câmera aprimorada, você deixa sua foto genial sem ter que baixar outros apps. Tem tanta coisa que o Samsung Galaxy AI pode fazer por você. Clica aí no banner para descobrir o que. Galaxy AI, a inteligência artificial nas suas mãos.
Good morning, guys, and happy holidays. Hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving week. And today I've got a special guest for you, Yossi Kossowsky from Israel. And he is with AIRR Consulting. We're going to hear about all that it is. And our guest today, we're going to be talking around the themes of leadership and coaching, navigating change, team dynamics, emotional intelligence, and the future of leadership. And I'm really happy to have him on in this time and to bring his expertise and add value to the audience. So, Yossi, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. I know this has been very, times. So talk about your journey and your story. I know you go from Israel to New York and with the work that you do, and I'm excited to dive into the questions.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. My background actually is not in coaching at all. I started off my career in the technical world. I started off in IT in the early 90s and then moved into engineering in the early 2000s. And it was probably about mid 2005 or so, I started having more of leadership roles. And then I quickly got feedback that I wasn't doing a good job on the leadership side. And I really thought I understood people and how to work with people well and maybe even lead people. And the feedback I got was clearly not to that level. And so that got me really interested in wanting to understand what I didn't understand. And so as a result, I started studying neuroscience and emotional wellness therapy. And through those practices or those learnings, I started to make a lot of behavioral changes and mindset changes that led me to be much more effective in working with other individuals. And it took a couple of years of learning, and I really wanted to get certified in the stuff that I was learning. And so in 2010, I finished those certifications and subsequently also realized I was getting better results in working with people. It was much more effective. I got great feedback. And so in wanting to put it into practice, that's when I decided to go pursue coaching. And that kind of just continued the real shift of my life, where I started in the company I was in, started doing leadership development work, coaching, large scale change management, team development work. And it was all pretty much predicated on this neuroscience and emotional wellness understanding of where's our triggers coming from? What's the role of perception in the way we understand and make sense of the world? And what I mean by that is that I am talking to you, I'm talking to the audience, but what people are hearing and understanding is unknown to me. And often we operate to be able to operate in our world based on assumption that what I'm saying, you're understanding, and vice versa. And what I've discovered is that actually tends to lead us quite astray. And that's what got me into coaching and has kept me in coaching, is wanting to help people make sense of their world and be more productive. In terms of my location going, it's really just a family opportunity. I'm from the US, originally from Denver, but I also have family in Israel. So given the post-COVID world of a lot of remote work, I get the opportunity to travel.
Yeah, what a wonderful introduction. And so I'd love to just dive into it. And first thing is talking about, especially, I think the world today needs more better coaching and leaders. And I think this old paradigm of leadership and this top down and hierarchical old way of leadership and coaching has to change. So talk about transformative coaching and how you approach coaching to help leaders uncover their potential and master strategic thinking in today's rapidly evolving workplace.
So it's a really interesting question, Chris. Right before this call, I actually was coaching another leader in a really large oil and gas company. And the challenge is sometimes people don't understand that these terminologies of transformation, leadership, what they mean and how they translate into the work that we do. The other part that I'm seeing that goes along with it is this concept that I don't have time. I don't have time to make changes to my behavior, to what I do and the way that I do it, that might lead to being more effective, but I just don't have time to do that. And what I often ask leaders to reflect on is when things don't go right the first time, when they are asking for a deliverable from a team or a team member, colleague, whatever, and they don't get back what they want the first time, how much time do they spend cleaning that up or fixing it or addressing it? And everybody admits that they're spending a lot of time on that, not to mention a lot of frustration. And so if we were to take things that we're being taught or learning about, if I don't know that you understand me when I'm talking to you, then the thing I can do is confirm. I can sit down afterwards and say, what did you understand? What are your takeaways? What are your action items? Or vice versa, if I am listening to somebody talking to me, I can also validate and say, hey, this is my understanding of what I heard or what my takeaways are. And it doesn't sound like it's a lot of work to do that validation and confirmation work. And people are loath to do it and continue not getting the results that they want. So the first part for me is just a simple nuance to our interactions, which is after you are talking or listening, don't ask a yes or no question of any questions, anything you don't understand. Ask an actual question that requires an in-depth answer. What's your understanding? What's your takeaways? And I find that when people do that, their productivity and their productivity goes up, frustration goes down. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yes. And I want to expand upon that and talk about this idea because you have executive presence and you talk about the key factors leaders need to develop to enhance their executive presence and lead with authenticity and impact. So talk more about that.
It's interesting. The idea again of executive presence and what executive presence is, I think is a gamut of potential things. One of those challenges is the idea that what I want to say doesn't necessarily translate to what you're going to hear. And when I want to communicate more effectively, the first question I tend to ask myself, and I ask leaders to ask themselves is, once you understand what you want to say, the next question is, what do you want the others to hear? And when we ask ourselves that question, a lot of sub questions come up, which is, who is that person? What does their world look like? What are their responsibilities? What are their needs? What are they looking for? What's important to them? What are their priorities? And if I can even glean some ideas based on what I know about what they do, what their job is, I can try to make a bridge of what I think will be important to them that also includes what's important to me. So when we go to executive presence and I'm talking to people that are often in the hierarchy more senior than me, the question is, I've actually never maybe done those jobs, so I don't actually know what their world is like. How do I guess what is going to be important to them? And I find that just the idea of asking myself, let me try to put myself in their shoes. Let me try to imagine a day in the life of that person, what's important to them, allows me to change the way I converse with them to make my conversation more impactful and important to them. And so when I coach leaders on executive presence, that's our starting point. And again, the results that I hear back from people is it makes a huge difference. What's your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, it's a really interesting insight because this idea of presence, and you have to give your followers and your company and the people underneath you this feeling that so that they can be perform at their best. And so I really love this idea. Moving on, we talk about in this, you talked about this post-COVID era, also this era where Europe had this international flavor where we're at a war. I wouldn't call it a cold war, but it's another type of war climate. So talk about sharing insights on effectively managing change, especially with fast changing industries with technology, but you have like slow moving industries, healthcare, governments. Talk about how leaders can navigate change.
So again, I get a little pedantic about wording and what does that mean? And so I think that there's lots of changes that are about in the world. And the first question is, what is this change that we're talking about? And I guess by the industry and by what people are doing, that the change would be different, which I don't think is surprising. There's a model that I really love. It's called ADKAR, ADKAR, and it's from a company called ProSci, PROSCI. That's a change management company. And ADKAR is a model for the human side of change. So A stands for awareness, D for desire, K for knowledge, the second A for ability, and then the R for reinforcement. And when I'm working with leaders to help them understand change, to lead change, to reinforce change, this is the model we often go through. So the first A of awareness essentially translates to why this change, why now, and honestly, the opposite question, which is what if we don't do it? So when companies bring about change, when governments bring about change, most of the time people announce change at the what scale. What is changing? And we don't often talk about why and what led to that decision of change. And the joke I always talk about with people is, if you're working in a company and the CEO sends out a message to everybody, starting tomorrow, everyone needs to wear bright pink hats in every meeting, virtually or in person, and that's the message you get, what is your emotional response? And most people say, why do I have to do that? And even though a bright pink hat seems wildly out of frame for what most companies are doing or what most people are doing, and other changes maybe seem in frame, the why question still comes up. And so answering the why, or having an answer for why, is a key skill and a key necessity to help lead change. And then the second part of the desire is to recognize that just because you give a reason doesn't mean that people will want to come along on the ride with you, that people will agree or buy into it. And so if we cannot satisfy the awareness and the desire piece of the model, the why and the what's in it for me or what's in it for them, we will have resistance to change. And so that's the first part, and almost the hardest part. So Chris, what do you think about that?
It's a really interesting insights. And when you're talking about navigating change, it's talking a lot about resilience in leadership and how leaders can build resilience in themselves and also empower their teams to adapt to the hybrid business landscape, which brings us to our next question, is like team dynamics and effectiveness. And what are your strategies for helping leaders foster collaboration and productivity with, especially with remote and people are not in the same time zone, and you've got diversity, you've got cultural, and sometimes language barriers. How do you help leaders foster this sense of inclusiveness and cohesiveness, especially large corporations?
So Chris, part of this comes back to something that we mentioned before, which is the gap, or the moving from what I want to say to what I want you to hear space. Because if it's about followship and not about leadership, meaning I can tell people to go and do X, Y, or Z or Z, that doesn't mean that they will. And what I really need to do as a leader is to get work done through others, meaning to delegate and help people come along on the journey and want to come along on that journey. So my focus needs to move away from what my role is and being of the leader, and understand that my role is really about getting people to follow me. And therefore, the next question is, why would people want to follow me? What am I doing to entice that followership? Am I creating a relationship where they feel valued, understood, heard? And it does change by culture, because different cultures have different ways of feeling valued, of feeling understood. And my opportunity as a leader, and when I work with leaders, is for them to start to ask more questions and move away from talking as much and doing statements as much, and becoming much more curious about what it is that the people that they are leading need from them, want from them. What do they value? What will be meaningful to them? What will entice them? What will engage them? And so what I really advise leaders is to get much more curious, to listen, to ask questions with curiosity, and to listen for the understanding of the other person, so that those people feel heard and understood. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, which I really love that. And the I know we have a few more minutes remaining. And so talk about this. One thing that's really stood out to me when I was researching you and looking at your work is this idea of neuroscience and leadership. And I'm just curious, what is your thoughts on neuroscience-based approach to leadership? How does it enhance development and adaptability in individuals and in teams?
So there's a lot of different aspects to the neuroscience. There's the biological, physiological aspects to it, which is what is happening in our brain and our biology when we are experiencing different things, when we are happy, when we're stressed, when we're tired, etc. And how does that play a role in performance? And so helping leaders understand that piece is one aspect of it. A more day-to-day, especially with a remote level, there's also this idea of understanding ourselves better and our triggers, because we tend to get triggered. And when we do, the question is, how do we respond and react to that? And when our team members get triggered, how do they respond and react? And so the neuroscience piece really taught me a lot about when we get triggered, the behaviors that we display are not indicative of what actually is happening inside of us. It's just an outward explosion of a lot of energy. What the neuroscience tells us is that when we are getting triggered, something inside of us, a rule, a value, an idea, an ideal, belief system is actually being kicked in the head. And that's what's creating the trigger. And so if we can change our questions with our team, rather than what's bothering you, to what just happened? Was there a belief that was challenged? Was there an idea, an ideal, a value that got challenged? Help me understand that we actually can get to the root cause of the friction much quicker. So that is one of the practical ways that I work with. I use neuroscience as a way to help leaders become more effective.
I was listening to this podcast by Andrew Huberman. He was talking about neuroplasticity, and when you were talking, it reminded me, just because he's talking about these the emotional environment and also the neurochemical environment. You can actually, past traumas or past triggers, you can actually go back and rewrite those by a variety of techniques. So I know we're coming to the end of this. When you talk about the future of leadership, what are the key leadership trends you foresee in the future, particularly as people are starting to wake up and they realize that kind of their leaders and their governments are not, or their institutions are not up to par? We've also got this kind of we've got technology, we've got AI, we've got hybrid work. So what are some of the key skills and trends in leadership that you foresee?
So the first one is curiosity, and real deep curiosity. So for me, that translates to, when I hear something, don't take it at face value. Ask myself, how do I know this to be true? Why do I think it's true? What's my proof, or my proofs that what I believe, or what I am translating something that I'm hearing to, what makes it true? So real curiosity. And then the second challenge is the echo chamber piece, which is I find that we've gotten really uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And that means that if I hear something that I don't like, if I see something I don't like, rather than being curious about it, I tend to shove it out the door. I tend to say it's not true, it's wrong, it's something, and I'm not curious. And so as the world, I think, is getting more polarized and all of these things are happening, all I'm seeing is more and more of being uncomfortable with being uncomfortable and therefore throwing it out without being curious. And so I would say the number one skill is curiosity. And the second skill is how to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable so that I can learn more about what's going on in the world, even if it makes me uncomfortable.
Really insightful. And yeah, we have this whole cancel culture, people are talking about woke culture. That's for another topic. But thanks so much for coming on and sharing your insights and expertise in these times. And how can people contact you and reach out to you and find out more about the work that you do?
Yeah. So Chris, the best way to get hold of me is on LinkedIn. I find that I have a website. LinkedIn is a universal platform at this point. So if you don't mind when you post the podcast to put my LinkedIn link on there, I'm very up to date. I answer all my messages on LinkedIn. That is the best way to reach me.
Excellent. And thanks so much for coming on and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much, Chris. And you have a great rest of your day and the holiday season that's coming up. So enjoy.